There's an island in Michigan where cars have been banned since 1898, where the ambulance is a horse-drawn wagon, where the fire truck is a horse-drawn wagon, where even the garbage collection involves horses and carts because the entire island decided over a century ago that automobiles were a temporary fad and they haven't changed their mind since. This isn't a historical reenactment, it's not a theme park, it's just a place that made a choice in 1898 and stuck with it so completely that walking down Main Street feels like stepping into a postcard your grandmother kept in a shoebox. And here's the thing, nobody tells you about 1961. It's still out there, not in a museum, not behind velvet ropes, just sitting in the high desert, tucked into mountain valleys, baking on coastal plains, frozen at 9,000 feet in the Rockies, waiting for you to find it. We're talking about towns where the soda fountain still has the original counter, where Main Street looks exactly like it did when Kennedy was president, where the movie theater has one screen and the popcorn costs $1 because they genuinely haven't thought about raising the price. But there's a catch. There's always a catch, because these towns didn't preserve 1961 on purpose. They preserved it by accident, through isolation, through poverty, through sheer geographic stubbornness, through collective exhaustion with the concept of progress. And that means when you move there, you're not getting the highlight reel of the early 60s. You're getting all of it. The pace, the limitations, the winters that last 6 months, the nearest hospital that's 90 miles away, the internet that arrives via satellite if it arrives at all. So we're counting down 9 American towns that stopped the clock somewhere between the Berlin Wall and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some did it on purpose. Some did it by necessity. One of them did it because the population dropped so low they elected a dog and called it democracy. We're starting with towns that feel like 1961 if you squint, and ending with a place that would need a time machine to catch up to 1985. Hit subscribe if you've ever looked at a black and white photo of your hometown's main street and wondered where that place went. Hit like if you think progress is overrated, and drop a comment telling me, what year would you go back to if you could take your current bank account with you? Let's find out where 1961 is still punching the clock. Location number 9, Mackinac Island, Michigan, the legal time lock. We're starting in the straits between Lake Huron and Lake Michigan, where an island decided in 1898 that cars were a temporary fad, banned them entirely, and has been operating as a horse-drawn time capsule ever since. Mackinac Island, Michigan, population 583 in winter, maybe 15,000 in summer. No cars since 1898, accessible only by ferry or plane, and the most legally enforced preservation of pre-automobile America you'll find anywhere. Here's the thing about Mackinac. The car ban wasn't about preserving charm. It was about noise complaints. In 1898, cars were loud, unreliable, and scaring the horses. The city council banned them to protect the tourism industry, which was already built on wealthy Midwesterners coming to the island to escape industrial Detroit and Chicago. The ban stuck, the horses stayed, and now the island operates exactly like it did in 1961, which operated exactly like it did in 1920, which operated exactly like it did in 1890. According to Michigan Realtor data, median home prices on Mackinac Island hover around $675,000, which is expensive until you realize you're buying one of maybe 500 year-round residences on an island where development is legally restricted and 80% of the land is state park. Homes rarely hit the market. When they do, they're snapped up by families who've been summering on the island for 4 generations, or locals who've saved for decades. The downtown, which is basically Main Street and a few side streets, is Victorian preservation at its most complete. The Grand Hotel, built in 1887, operates exactly as it did, right down to requiring jackets at dinner. The Island House Hotel dates to 1852. The buildings along Main Street are 19th century commercial architecture painted in period colors. There are no chain stores, no franchises, not because of zoning, but because getting inventory to an island with no cars is expensive enough that only locally owned businesses make economic sense. The entire island runs on horses, bicycles, and your own 2 feet. There are roughly 500 horses on the island during summer. Dray horses pull freight wagons from the ferry docks to the hotels. Carriage horses pull tourists on tours. The ambulance is a horse-drawn wagon. The fire truck is a horse-drawn wagon. Even the garbage collection is done with horses and carts. What makes Mackinac feel specifically like 1961 is that it represents the last moment when this kind of preservation still seemed possible. Before environmental regulations, before disability access requirements, before the modern assumption that cars are a human right, Mackinac is grandfathered into a way of life that you legally couldn't create today. What you're getting: a genuinely car-free existence on an island with 70 miles of roads and trails, none of which have automotive traffic. The pace of life moves at the speed of horses. The summer brings tourists, but the winter is yours. 583 people on an island with more Victorian architecture than most states. What you're giving up: accessibility in every sense. You're on an island. The ferry runs year-round, but winter crossings are weather-dependent. The ice bridge, a frozen path across the straits, only forms in the coldest winters, and walking it is either adventure or suicide depending on ice conditions. Medical emergencies mean life flight to the mainland. The hospital is a small clinic. Serious medical needs require evacuation. The economy is 100% tourism. If you live here year-round, you work in hospitality, own a business that caters to tourists, or you're retired. The season runs from May to October. The island makes 90% of its annual revenue in 4 months. The rest of the year is survival mode. Plowing snow with horses, heating houses that predate insulation standards, and getting groceries from the one small market that charges island prices because everything arrives by ferry. Location number 8, Marfa, Texas, the accidental time capsule. From Michigan's frozen island, we're heading to the high desert of West Texas. 3 hours from anything you'd call a city, where the landscape looks like God gave up halfway through, and the town that survived looks like a film set somebody forgot to strike. Marfa, Texas, population 1,699, elevation 4,688 feet, and the most accidentally perfect preservation of 1961 ranching culture you'll find anywhere in America. Here's what happened. Marfa was a railroad water stop that became a ranching hub that became a military outpost during World War II. When the base closed, the town should have died. Instead, it went into hibernation. The ranchers stayed because ranchers are stubborn. The buildings stayed because nobody had money to tear them down. And the whole place just sat there in the desert, baking under that relentless West Texas sun, waiting. Then in the 1970s, an artist named Donald Judd showed up, took one look at the abandoned military buildings and the unchanged downtown, and decided he'd found the most honest place in America. He bought a bunch of real estate, turned it into art installations, and accidentally created a magnet for every creative type who wanted to escape without actually going off grid. But here's the magic. The artists didn't change Marfa, they preserved it, because what they wanted was exactly what was already there. The wide streets, the low adobe buildings, the uninterrupted horizon, the pace of life that moves at the speed of cattle. According to Zillow, the median home price in Marfa sits at $285,000. That's expensive for West Texas, but it's what a parking space costs in San Francisco, and this comes with actual sky. Redfin data shows homes spend an average of 67 days on market, which tells you there's genuine demand from people who understand what they're buying. The downtown is pure 1961. The Hotel Paisano, where James Dean stayed during the filming of Giant, looks exactly like it did in 1955. The Sentinel newspaper building hasn't changed its facade since 1957. The courthouse dominates the square like courthouses used to, back when civic architecture meant something. You can walk the entire commercial district in 15 minutes. And every building you pass could be a period-accurate backdrop for the last picture show. What you're getting: brutal honesty. Marfa doesn't pretend to be something it's not. It's a ranching town that got colonized by artists who wanted authenticity, and the result is this weird hybrid where you can get a breakfast taco from a woman whose family has been here for 4 generations, then walk next door to a gallery showing minimalist sculpture that costs more than a ranch house. What you're giving up: convenience, proximity, climate control you take for granted. Summer temperatures regularly crack 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The nearest Walmart is 76 miles away in Alpine. Your closest emergency room is that same 76 miles. Cell service is spotty. High-speed internet exists if you're willing to pay for it and accept that high speed is a relative term. A local artist put it perfectly: Marfa doesn't care if you like it. It's been here longer than you have, and it'll be here after you leave. You adapt to Marfa. Marfa doesn't adapt to you. Picture this: 7 a.m. on a Tuesday in October. The sun is just clearing the mountains to the east, turning the desert that pale gold that only exists in West Texas. You walk to the coffee shop, one of 3 in town, and recognize half the people in line. You hear Spanish, you hear New York accents, you hear 4th-generation ranch families talking cattle prices. Your biggest decision today is whether to drive out to the Chinati Foundation or just sit on a bench and watch the light change. Your rent is $1,200 a month for a renovated adobe that would cost $4,000 in Santa Fe. At least Marfa has Wi-Fi and cell service, even if it's spotty. Our next stop took German stubbornness and turned it into a 187-year preservation project. Location number 7, Herman, Missouri, the German holdout. From the high desert, we're heading to the Missouri River Valley, where a town decided in 1837 that it would be Germany in America, and then spent the next 187 years refusing to change its mind. Herman, Missouri. Population 2,200, founded by German immigrants who wanted to preserve German culture. Succeeded so completely that the town looks like someone airlifted a Bavarian village into the Midwest and nobody noticed. Here's the thing about Herman. This isn't 1961 preservation. This is 1840s preservation that made it through 1961 intact and just kept going. The buildings on Main Street date to before the Civil War. The wineries, and there are 7 of them within city limits, were founded by German immigrants who brought their vines with them across the Atlantic. The churches still conduct some services in German. The town's entire economy is built on the fact that it looks exactly like it did when Ulysses S. Grant was still drinking too much and failing at real estate. According to the Herman Area Board of Realtors, median home prices hover around $215,000. Zillow confirms this and shows an average of 89 days on market, which tells you this is a place buyers actually research before committing. You're not impulse buying into Herman, you're making a choice. The downtown is a German postcard. Brick buildings with ornate cornices, wrought iron balconies, narrow streets that were designed for horse carts, and now create charming traffic jams during Oktoberfest when 60,000 tourists show up to a town of 2,200. The Colonnade Hotel has been operating since 1823. The Stonehill Winery has cellars carved into the hillside in 1847. The Deutsheim State Historic Site preserves buildings exactly as they were in 1860. What makes Herman feel like 1961 specifically is that it's a functional town, not a museum. People live here year-round. The grocery store is locally owned. The hardware store knows your name. Kids go to school here. It's not Disneyland. It's a place that happens to look like a movie set because nobody ever had a reason to knock anything down. What you're getting: a town that takes its heritage seriously enough to enforce it. Building codes require period-appropriate renovations. You can't just slap vinyl siding on a 150-year-old brick building and call it progress. The Architectural Review Board will make sure your renovation respects what was there before you showed up. What you're giving up: anonymity, fast food, the assumption that you can do whatever you want with your property. This is a small town with small town rules, both written and unwritten. The nearest city is St. Louis, 95 miles east. Your economic options are tourism, wine, or commuting. The town essentially shuts down from November through March when the tourist season ends. The trade-off is community. A Reddit thread about Herman had one transplant explain it this way: you can't be anonymous here, which is either the best thing or the worst thing, depending on whether you like people. The upside is when your car breaks down, 4 people stop to help before AAA even answers the phone. Fun fact: Herman was specifically founded as a German Athens to preserve German language and culture in America. The founders worried that German immigrants were assimilating too quickly in cities, so they created a town where assimilation was structurally impossible. It worked. Picture this: Saturday morning in May, you walk to the farmer's market in the town pavilion. The same families have been selling vegetables here for 4 generations. Someone's selling bratwurst from a cart. You hear as much German as English. The buildings around you were here when Missouri was still figuring out which side of the slavery debate it was on. You spend $30 on produce, bread, and sausage. You know everyone's name. You walk home past brick buildings that have been in the same families since 1870. And if Herman preserved culture through determination, our next town preserved the West by being too broke to update it. Location number 6, Minden, Nevada, the Neon Fossil. We're back in the desert, this time in the Carson Valley of western Nevada, where a town built on mining pivoted to ranching, then pivoted to agriculture, and never quite found the money to catch up to the 21st century. Minden, Nevada, population 3,400, established 1906, and the most complete collection of intact mid-century neon in the American West that nobody's written a coffee table book about yet. Minden happened because the Virginia and Truckee Railroad needed a railhead in the Carson Valley. The town grew up around ranching and dairy farming, not mining, which meant when the mines played out, Minden just kept going, slowly, steadily, without any of the boom and bust drama that killed other Nevada towns. It's been the same size, more or less, for 70 years. The same families own the same ranches. The same buildings line the same streets. Nothing much changes because nothing much needs to. According to Zillow, median home prices in Minden sit at $548,000, which sounds expensive until you you realize that's what a teardown costs in Reno, 45 minutes north. Redfin shows homes spending an average of 52 days on market, which indicates steady demand from people leaving California and looking for something that feels like California used to feel. The downtown is small, 4 blocks of 2-story brick buildings with intact storefronts, original signage, and neon that still glows at night. The Carson Valley Inn has a vintage neon sign that's been there since 1949. The Minden Butter Manufacturing Company building, built in 1906, still stands exactly as it was. The Douglas County Courthouse, built in 1915, dominates the town square with that aggressive confidence public buildings used to project. What makes Minden feel specifically like 1961 is that it's not trying. This isn't a preservation district. Nobody formed a historical society to save the buildings. They're still here because tearing them down and building something new costs money, and Minden has always operated on the assumption that what's already built probably works fine. What you're getting: high desert ranching culture with mountain views and 4 actual seasons. The Sierra Nevada rises directly west of town. Lake Tahoe is 40 minutes away. Reno is close enough for hospital runs and Costco trips. You're remote, but not stranded. What you're giving up: culture in the arts and dining sense. Minden has good Mexican food, solid steak houses, and that's about where the culinary adventure ends. The economy runs on ranching, government jobs, and retirees who cashed out of California. If you need a job that doesn't involve cattle, hay, or bureaucracy, you're commuting to Reno or Carson City. The weather is high desert serious. Summer days hit 95 degrees Fahrenheit. Winter nights drop to 15 degrees Fahrenheit. The wind comes down from the mountains and doesn't stop. You'll own more fleece than you thought possible. Your heating and cooling bills will make you question your choices twice a year. A realtor based in Gardnerville, Minden's twin town across the street, told us off the record, people move here thinking they want small town Nevada, then realize small town Nevada means you see the same 200 people everywhere you go. Half of them love it. Half of them are back in Reno within 2 years. U.S. Census data shows Minden's population has grown only 8% in the last 20 years, which tells you this is a place that grows at the speed of generational turnover, not tech booms. The median age is 47. This is where people come to slow down, not to start over. Picture this: Thursday evening in September. The sun is setting behind the Sierras, turning the whole valley that specific gold and purple color that only happens in high desert autumn. You walk to the Carson Valley Inn for dinner because it's one of 3 restaurants in town, and you've already been to the other 2 this week. The neon is starting to glow. The ranchers at the bar are talking water rights. You order a steak the size of a catcher's mitt for $28. You know the waitress's name. You recognize half the people in the dining room. Tomorrow looks exactly like today, and that's exactly why you moved here. But if Minden's isolation came from geography and economics, our next stop chose it deliberately. Location number 5. Red Lodge, Montana, the ski town that time forgot. From Nevada's high desert, we're heading north to the edge of the Absaroka Beartooth Wilderness, where a coal mining town became a ski town in the 1960s and then just stopped evolving. Red Lodge, Montana, population 2,340, elevation 5,555 feet, gateway to the Beartooth Highway, which is either the most beautiful drive in America or a 68-mile anxiety attack depending on how you feel about switchbacks and 1,000-foot drops. Red Lodge was built on coal. The mines closed in the 1950s. The town should have died. Instead, it reinvented itself as a ski destination just in time for the Kennedy-era skiing boom, built a modest ski area, and discovered that people would drive hours to ski somewhere that still had a main street with a soda fountain. That soda fountain, the Red Lodge Cafe, is still there, still serving malts, still has the original counter from 1949. The menu hasn't changed in 60 years because the menu didn't need to change. You can get a burger, fries, and a shake for $14, which is either a bargain or a sign that nobody told Red Lodge about inflation. According to Zillow, median home prices in Red Lodge hover around $627,000, which is shocking for a town of 2,340 in Montana, until you realize what you're buying: access to world-class skiing, fly fishing, hiking, and the kind of scenery that makes grown adults pull over and just stare. Redfin data shows homes spending an average of of 78 days on market, indicating buyers are selective but committed. The downtown is 12 blocks of brick and stone buildings built between 1890 and 1940. The Pollard Hotel, built in 1893, still operates with period fixtures. The Roman Theater, built in 1917, still shows movies on one screen. Broadway Avenue looks exactly like a postcard from 1961. Two-story commercial buildings, diagonal parking, awnings over the sidewalks, mountains rising at the end of every street. What makes Red Lodge feel frozen in 1961 specifically is that it represents the last moment when small ski towns were still small. This is pre-Vail, pre-corporate consolidation, pre-real estate speculation, disguised as skiing. Red Lodge Mountain Ski Area has 1,675 skiable acres, 8 lifts, and absolutely no pretension. It's a ski hill, not a resort. The difference matters. What you're getting, genuine mountain town culture that hasn't been Disneyfied yet. The bars are dive bars. The locals know each other. The ski patrol includes guys who've been skiing these slopes since the 1970s. You can still afford to live here if you're willing to work 2 jobs seasonally like everybody else. What you're giving up, winters that are not theoretical. Red Lodge averages 170 inches of snow per year. The ski area opens in late November and closes in mid-April. The Beartooth Highway, your scenic route to Yellowstone, is closed from mid-October to late May because the snowpack at 10,947 feet doesn't mess around. You will own a snowblower, you will use it. The economy is 100% seasonal. Summer brings tourists heading to Yellowstone. Winter brings skiers. The shoulder seasons, April/May and September/October, are when locals exhale and remember what quiet sounds like. If you need year-round employment that isn't service industry, you're commuting to Billings, 65 miles north, and that commute in January is character building. U.S. Census Bureau data shows Red Lodge's population has actually declined 4% since 2010, even as property values climbed 43%. That's the math of resort towns eating themselves. Locals getting priced out by second home buyers who visit 8 weeks a year. A local who's lived here since 1987 put it this way in a community forum. Red Lodge in the 80s was a working class ski town. Red Lodge now is a working class ski town that rich people visit. We're still here, we're still working, but half of Main Street is owned by people from Billings or Colorado who only show up for Christmas and 4th of July. Picture this, January morning, 8 a.m., temperature is 12 degrees Fahrenheit. You walk to the Red Lodge Cafe because your car's been buried under 2 feet of snow since last night. The counter is full of locals who've been coming here for 30 years. You order coffee and eggs. Outside, the mountains are so white they hurt to look at. The ski area opens at 9 a.m. You've got first tracks if you want them. Your office is closed anyway. It's a powder day, which is a legitimate excuse here. You spend $8 on breakfast. You know everyone's name. And if Red Lodge held onto 1961 through mountain isolation and ski culture, our next town took it even further by climbing to 9,000 feet. Location number 4, Silverton, Colorado, the 9,000-foot museum. We're climbing from Montana's Beartooth Range to Colorado's San Juan Mountains, where a Victorian mining town sits at 9,308 feet, accessible by one mountain road or one narrow gauge railroad, and functionally operating as a living museum of what happens when a place is too high, too remote, and too steep for progress to bother with. Silverton, Colorado, population 637 in winter, maybe 900 in summer. Elevation 9,308 feet, and the most complete preservation of 1880s mining architecture you'll find anywhere in America, which ironically makes it feel exactly like 1961, because 1961 was the last time Silverton had money to change anything. Here's the timeline. Silverton boomed in the 1880s when silver was worth something. It crashed in 1893 when silver wasn't. It limped along on gold and lead mining until the 1960s. The last major mine closed in 1991. The town should be a ghost town. Instead, it's a ghost town with a gift shop because the Durango and Silverton narrow gauge railroad kept running tourist trains up the canyon, and tourists will pay $95 to ride a coal-fired steam locomotive to a place where the main street hasn't changed since Ulysses S. Grant visited in 1880. According to Zillow, median home prices in Silverton sit at $385,000, which sounds insane for a town of 637 until you realize there are maybe 400 total housing units, half of which are summer only because heating a Victorian house through a 6-month winter at 9,300 feet is a commitment to suffering. Redfin shows homes spending an average of 127 days on market because buyers need that much time to convince themselves this is actually a good idea. The downtown, all of it, the entire commercial district is a national historic landmark. Green Street looks exactly like a film set for a Western because it is a film set for Westerns when Hollywood needs authenticity. 2-story brick buildings with false fronts, wooden boardwalks, saloons that are actually saloons. The Wyman Hotel, built in 1902, operates as a hotel with period fixtures. The county courthouse, built in 1908, still handles county business in a building with more character than efficiency. What makes Silverton feel like 1961 is that the preservation isn't intentional, it's structural. You can't tear down a building and truck in modern materials when the road up from Durango closes every time it snows, which is often because this is 9,308 feet in the Rockies, and snow is the primary economic product from November through May. What you're getting, the most spectacular mountain scenery in Colorado, which is saying something, surrounded by 13,000 and 14,000 foot peaks. Access to backcountry skiing that makes people cry. Hiking that requires altitude acclimatization, a community of 637 people who are all here for the same reason, because they can't imagine being anywhere else. What you're giving up, oxygen, growing seasons, infrastructure you take for granted. The hospital is 50 miles away in Durango. The grocery store is one small market with limited selection because trucking food up a mountain pass is expensive. You will spend $200 on groceries that would cost $120 in Durango. Internet is satellite. Cell service is theoretical. The road to Durango, the only road, closes regularly in winter. You will own chains, know how to use them, and still stay home when the weather gets serious. The climate is not a joke. Average annual snowfall is 179 inches. The growing season is approximately 6 weeks. Temperatures drop below freezing 300 nights a year. Your heating bill will be a second mortgage. You will develop intimate knowledge of how many BTUs it takes to keep a poorly insulated Victorian house above freezing when it's minus 15 degrees Fahrenheit outside and the wind is coming straight down from the peaks. US Census data shows Silverton's year-round population dropped 19% between 2010 and 2020. The people who left were the ones who needed jobs. The people who stayed were retirees, ski bums, and the genuinely committed. A local business owner explained it in a mountain town forum. Silverton isn't a town, it's a test. If you make it through one winter, you're serious. If you make it through 3, you're permanent. Most people fail the test. That's fine. We don't need more people, we need the right people. Picture this. February afternoon, 3 p.m. The sun is dropping behind the peaks. Temperature is 8 degrees Fahrenheit and falling. You walk from your Victorian house to one of 3 bars downtown because there's nowhere else to go, and everybody you know is already there. The wood stove is going. Someone's dog is asleep by the fire. The same 12 people who were here last night are here tonight. Tomorrow there's a community potluck at the fire station because that's what you do when you're 50 miles from the nearest restaurant that isn't also a bar. You're snowed in. You're isolated. You've never been happier, but if Silverton's isolation was geographical, our next stop chose isolation as a lifestyle brand. Location number 3, Leavenworth, Washington, the manufactured memory. From Colorado's accidental preservation, we're heading to the Cascade Mountains of Washington, where a dying logging town made a choice in 1962 that was either brilliant or deranged. They would become Bavaria, and they would commit to the bit completely. Leavenworth, Washington. Population 2,306, Bavarian since 1965, and the most successful example of manufactured nostalgia in America, which makes it feel exactly like 1961 because 1961 was when America still believed reinvention was possible. Here's what happened. Leavenworth was a logging and railroad town. The railroad rerouted in 1920. The timber industry collapsed in the 1960s. The town was dying. 2 businessmen visited Solvang, California, a Danish-themed town that was printing money from tourism, and had a thought. What if we just became Germany? The town agreed. Building codes were passed requiring all downtown buildings to adopt Bavarian Bavarian architecture. Businesses changed their names to German words. Oktoberfest became the town's economic engine, and it worked. Leavenworth went from dying to thriving by becoming a place that never existed. A Bavarian alpine village in the Cascades where everyone speaks English and the sausages come from Seattle. According to Zillow, median home prices in Leavenworth hit $742,000, which is expensive for rural Washington, but makes sense when you realize this town gets 2.5 million tourists per year, visiting a population of 2,306. Redfin data shows homes spending an average of 63 days on market. There's genuine demand from people who want mountain access and don't mind that their town is functionally a theme park. The downtown is aggressively Bavarian. Every building has the timber frame facade, the flower boxes, the painted murals, the alpine details. The Enzian Inn looks like it was airlifted from the Alps. The restaurants serve schnitzel and brats because that's what the building codes and tourist expectations demand. Even the Safeway has a Bavarian facade. The gas station has decorative timber framing. The commitment is total. What makes Leavenworth feel like 1961 is that it represents the peak of American optimism, the belief that you could just decide to be something else and make it work through sheer determination and coordinated effort. This is the same energy that built Disneyland, that designed suburbs as utopias, that thought city planning could solve social problems. Leavenworth is what happens when a whole town decides to be an artifact. What you're getting, genuine alpine beauty with manufactured alpine culture. The Cascade Mountains are real. The hiking, skiing, river rafting, all real. The architecture, the theme, the festival culture, all constructed, but constructed so thoroughly that it's become its own authentic thing. What you're giving up, any pretense that you live in a normal town. You live in a tourist attraction. Your neighbors work in tourism. Your economy runs on people taking selfies in front of your fake Bavarian facades. The town is overrun from May through October and again during Christmas. Traffic is brutal. Parking is impossible. Every weekend is a festival celebrating some aspect of German culture that was never actually here. The weather is Cascade Mountain weather. Wet springs, dry summers, heavy snow in winter. The town averages 89 inches of snow per year, which is great for the ski areas nearby, and exhausting if you're trying to run a business that depends on people actually being able to reach you. US Census data shows Leavenworth's population has grown 15% since 2010, almost entirely driven by tourism employment and retirees who want mountain access. The median household income is $68,000, which is respectable until you factor in that housing costs have increased 62% in the last decade. A local who grew up here before the Bavarian transformation told a regional newspaper, "My grandfather helped build the first Bavarian facades in the 60s. He thought it was the stupidest thing he'd ever heard. Then it saved the town. Now I work in a restaurant where I wear lederhosen and serve tourists who think this has always been here. It's authentic fakeness. I can't explain it better than that." Fun fact, Leavenworth's transformation wasn't just aesthetic. The town passed strict building codes in 1965, requiring all commercial buildings within city limits to conform to Bavarian design standards. If you want to open a business downtown, your storefront will have timber framing, flower boxes, and alpine details whether you like it or not. The Architectural Review Board doesn't negotiate. Picture this, Saturday morning in July. You walk to the bakery for coffee because that's what you do in a Bavarian village, even though the bakery is a franchise and the coffee is Starbucks behind a timber facade. The tourists are already lined up for photos in front of the murals. You know which alleys to use to avoid the crowds. You're hiking the enchantments this afternoon, a trail so beautiful it requires a permit lottery. You live in a postcard. It's exhausting and beautiful and you wouldn't trade it for anything. And if Leavenworth manufactured 1961, our next stop just never left the 1960s because nobody bothered to update it. Location number 2, St. Mary's, Georgia, the shrimping village that forgot to change. From Washington's deliberate theater, we're heading to the Georgia coast, where a shrimping village sits at the mouth of the St. Mary's River, across the water from a massive naval base, and operates exactly like it did in 1961 because the shrimpers are still here, the boats still go out, and nobody ever got around to redeveloping the waterfront. St. Mary's, Georgia, population 18,256, founded 1787, and the most complete preservation of working waterfront culture on the Atlantic coast that nobody's gentrified yet because the Navy keeps buying up the land before developers can get to it. Here's what saves St. Mary's: proximity to Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base, which employs 10,000 people and occupies enough land to prevent the kind of coastal development that turned the rest of Georgia's coast into resorts. The base needs the town functional, not boutique. So St. Mary's stayed working class, stayed affordable, and stayed exactly the same because there was no economic pressure to change. According to Zillow, median home prices in St. Mary's sit at $287,000, which is shockingly affordable for coastal Georgia. Redfin shows homes spending an average of 48 days on market, indicating steady demand from Navy families and retirees who want coastal living without Charleston prices. You can still buy a house 3 blocks from the riverfront for under $250,000. That's not a typo. That's what happens when the military stabilizes the economy and scares off the developers. The downtown is pure 1960s coastal South. Low-slung buildings, wide sidewalks, Spanish moss hanging from the live oaks. The riverfront is working waterfront, shrimp boats, commercial fishing docks, industrial equipment. This isn't a boardwalk with gift shops. This is where people make their living from the ocean, same as they did in 1961, same as they did in 1900. The architecture is nothing special, which is exactly what makes it special. These are practical buildings built to withstand hurricanes and humidity. Concrete block, metal roofs, functional design. The downtown has a few antique shops, a diner, a hardware store that's been there since 1952, and not much else because there's not much demand for anything else. What makes St. Mary's feel like 1961 is that it represents working class coastal life before coastal property became an investment vehicle. This is a town where people fish for a living, where the Navy provides stable employment, where housing is affordable enough that service workers can live in the same town where they work. It's what every coastal town in America used to be before second homes and vacation rentals ate the economy. What you're getting, actual coastal living at prices that won't destroy you. You're 10 minutes from Cumberland Island National Seashore, one of the most beautiful and least visited barrier islands on the Atlantic coast. You're on the water. The climate is subtropical. Winter barely exists. You can afford a house. What you're giving up, culture, dining, the assumption that coastal living comes with coastal amenities. St. Mary's is a working town, not a destination. The restaurants are diners and seafood shacks. The entertainment is high school football and going to Jacksonville, 35 miles south, for anything that resembles urban culture. The climate is coastal Georgia, which means humidity you can see, summer temperatures that make you question your choices, and hurricane season that's not theoretical. The town floods. Not every year, but enough that flood insurance is mandatory and expensive. The mosquitoes are biblical. The heat from June through September is oppressive. U.S. Census data shows St. Mary's has grown 23% since 2010, almost entirely driven by Navy transfers and retirees attracted by affordable coastal housing. The median household income is $58,000, solidly middle class in a region where middle class is getting priced out everywhere else. A local shrimper told a regional newspaper, "My family's been fishing these waters since the 1890s. My grandfather shrimped here. My father shrimped here. I shrimp here. The Navy keeps the town stable. The tourists leave us alone because we're not cute enough. That's fine. We're not trying to be Savannah. We're trying to fish." The waterfront at dawn is what 1961 looked like if 1961 had modern OSHA regulations. Shrimp boats heading out, diesel engines rumbling, gulls following the boats, the smell of salt and fuel and fish. The same families who worked these docks in 1961 are working them now. The same boats, or at least the same models, are still going out. Picture this, Tuesday morning, 6 a.m. The sun is just clearing the marshes across the river. You walk to the riverfront because that's where the coffee shop is, and that's where everyone goes. The shrimpers are already out. The Navy guys are heading to base. You smell salt marsh and breakfast from the diner. Your mortgage is $1,400 a month for a 3-bedroom house 4 blocks from the water. You don't have art galleries or craft breweries. You have a working waterfront, affordable housing, and a town that still functions like a town instead of a resort. You sit on a bench, drink your coffee, watch the boats, and remember this is what coastal living used to cost before it became a luxury. But if St. Mary's accidentally preserved 1961 through military proximity, our final stop took time preservation to its logical extreme. Location number 1. Rabbit Hash, Kentucky, the town that elected a dog and stopped trying. We end where we began, at that general store in Kentucky where the mayor is a dog and the building predates the Civil War and the whole place operates less like a town and more like a living museum that forgot it was supposed to charge admission. Rabbit Hash, Kentucky, population 315. Incorporated never. Mayor is a dog named Wilbur, and the most complete preservation of 19th century Rivertown culture in America because the population collapsed so thoroughly that preservation happened by default. Here's the history. Rabbit Hash was a steamboat landing on the Ohio River in the 1830s. It had a post office, a general store, a few houses. The steamboat era ended. The town should have died. Instead, it just stopped growing, stopped changing, stopped being a functional municipality, and became something else. A placeholder, a fossil, a place where the general store from 1831 is still the general store because nobody ever built a replacement. The Rabbit Hash General Store burned down in 2016. The entire town, all 315 people, rallied to rebuild it exactly as it was, using period-appropriate materials, preserving every detail down to the wooden floors and the pot-bellied stove. They raised $400,000 through donations and rebuilt a 19th century building in the 21st century because that building wasn't just a store. It was the entire reason the town still existed. According to Boone County property records, homes in Rabbit Hash sell for $180,000 to $350,000, which sounds reasonable until you realize there are maybe 100 total properties, most of which never hit the market because they've been in the same families since the 1800s. When something does sell, it's usually to someone who understands what they're buying. A house in a place that isn't really a town anymore, just a historical oddity with a mailing address. The downtown is one building, that's it. The general store, the post office window inside the general store, and a few antique shops that are open when the owners feel like it. There's no municipal government, no police force, no fire department beyond a volunteer crew. The mayor is a dog because the town holds elections for mayor as a fundraiser, and dogs keep winning because the whole thing is performance art at this point. What makes Rabbit Hash the ultimate 1961 preservation is that it represents the logical endpoint of small town decline, the point where a place becomes so small it stops functioning as a town and becomes a historical artifact that people happen to live in. There's no economy beyond the general store and tourism from people who want to buy a t-shirt that says they met a dog mayor. There are no jobs, no schools, no services. What you're getting, a house in a place that looks exactly like a Currier and Ives print on the Ohio River with a general store that sells penny candy and nostalgia. You're 30 minutes from Cincinnati if you need civilization. You're 200 yards from the river if you need silence. What you're giving up, everything that makes a place functional. There's no grocery store, no gas station, no medical clinic, no restaurant beyond the general store's sandwich counter. Your nearest hospital is 20 miles away. Your kids go to school in the next town over. You commute to Burlington or Cincinnati for work because Rabbit Hash doesn't have employers. The houses are period. 19th century construction, some updated, most not. You're buying charm and history and structural challenges, foundation issues, plumbing from when indoor plumbing was an upgrade, electrical systems that make inspectors nervous, heating costs that punish you for living in a building designed when fireplaces were cutting-edge technology. US Census data doesn't track Rabbit Hash separately because it's not actually incorporated. It's an unincorporated community in Boone County. The 315 population figure comes from local estimates and is probably generous. The year-round population might be closer to 200, with the rest being weekend residents or people who claim Rabbit Hash addresses for the novelty. A resident who moved here in 2003 explained it to a Louisville newspaper. Rabbit Hash isn't a town, it's a stage set. We're all actors playing the parts of people living in the past. The difference is we actually live here. The general store is real. The houses are real. The mayor being a dog is real. It's all real. It's just not functional the way a normal town is functional. Fun fact, Rabbit Hash has elected 4 dog mayors since 1998. The current mayor, Wilbur, is a French bulldog who took office in 2020 after the previous mayor, Bryneth Paltrow, retired. The elections are legitimate. People pay to vote, the money goes to maintaining the general store, and the dogs win because nobody's running a serious human campaign in a town of 315 people where the mayor has no actual authority. The general store is the town. It sells provisions like it did in 1831. Canned goods, candy, bread, milk. It also sells t-shirts, postcards, and Rabbit Hash memorabilia to the tourists who drive down from Cincinnati to take pictures with the dog mayor. On weekends, the store is packed. On weekdays, it's 3 locals drinking coffee and talking about the same things they talked about yesterday. Picture this. Sunday afternoon in October, the leaves are turning along the Ohio River. You're sitting on the porch of the general store that was rebuilt after the fire, that was built originally in 1831, that sells the same candy your great-grandparents bought. The mayor, a French bulldog, is asleep on the porch. A family from Cincinnati is taking photos. You live here. Your house is 200 yards away. It was built in 1867. You commute to Burlington for work. You don't have neighbors in the traditional sense because your nearest neighbor is 3 acres away and only comes down on weekends. You have the Ohio River, the general store, the dog mayor, and absolute silence when the tourists leave. You moved here because you wanted to live in a time that doesn't exist anymore, and you succeeded. This is 1961. This is 1931. This is 1831. Time stopped in Rabbit Hash because there wasn't enough population left to keep it moving. So that's the countdown. 9 American towns that stopped the clock somewhere between Kennedy's inauguration and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Some froze by accident through isolation or poverty. Some froze on purpose through legislation or collective effort. One froze because the population collapsed to the point where a dog became mayor and nobody thought that was weird anymore. Mackinac Island legislated it into permanence with a car ban in 1898 and never looked back. Marfa preserved itself through artistic colonization. Herman preserved itself through ethnic stubbornness. Minden preserved itself by being too broke to modernize. Red Lodge preserved itself through mountain isolation and ski culture. Silverton preserved itself at 9,308 feet, where progress couldn't reach. Leavenworth manufactured preservation as a tourism strategy. St. Mary's stumbled into it through military proximity. And Rabbit Hash achieved it through population collapse so complete the town became performance art. The pattern is clear. 1961 still exists, but only in places that paid a price for keeping it. Remoteness, weather, economic stagnation, tourist dependence, legal restrictions, population decline. You don't get to preserve the past without giving up the present. The question is whether that trade-off is worth it. Whether you want the soda fountain badly enough to accept that the nearest hospital is 50 miles away. Whether you want the Victorian architecture badly enough to heat it through a 6-month winter. Whether you want everyone to know your name badly enough to never be anonymous again. These towns are escape hatches from the America that exists now. The strip malls, the chain restaurants, the suburbs that all look identical, the cities where you can't afford to live, the pace of life that never stops accelerating. But they're not fantasy, they're real places with real trade-offs, and if you move there thinking you're getting the good parts of 1961 without the hard parts, you're going to be disappointed. If this video made you think about where you'd live if you could rewind the clock, hit subscribe. If it made you grateful you have high-speed internet and next-day delivery, hit like anyway, and drop a comment telling me which of these 9 towns you'd actually consider, or if you're already living in a place that time forgot and we should know about it. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go pet a mayor.